It's been a while since I've been called a boy wonder, or a middle-aged wonder, or anything like that. No, it's a pleasure to be here, Larry. I appreciate the introduction. It's always great to be back down here. The people who count this stuff, which I know other people do, tell me I've given over 4,000 speeches, which I guess means I've been introduced over 4,000 times. And Larry, I have to tell you, of all those introductions, that was by far the most recent, and I appreciate that very much. And it's great to be here. I always love to come down to Southeast Texas. I was raised in Northeast Texas, in a little town that was so small we had to take driver's education and sex education in the same car. And when I told my wife that, she said, "Ray, that makes perfect sense. You can't drive either." Just where's another respect I get at home. But it has been a privilege to get to come down here many times over the years. I won't say I'm old, but when I started coming down here and working on things, Maury Myers was the mayor. So that goes back in there too. So, but it's always been a pleasure over the years. We've had the privilege of working with the university, with Entergy, with the navigation district and the ports, and Lamar, and with Jim on many projects over the years. And it's always a pleasure to be here, be a part of these things, and see how things are going. And there really is a lot of excitement here. I always thought you guys liked me, but if I have to follow Mary Ann in a video like that, I'm not so sure you still like me anymore. But over the years, Mary Ann and I have become great friends. And she and Rennie, I remember you were at a breakfast table somewhere the first day you called me about this project a long time ago, and been involved in it ever since. So it's always great to be here. I'm going to talk about the speech will only be 3 minutes because there's nothing going on in the economy. Okay. As many of you know who've heard me before, I don't tend to dodge topics. I don't tend to dodge issues. I tend to tell you what I think. I try to be apolitical, and that means I make both sides mad all the time. In fact, I actually managed a couple of years ago during the congressional hearing to literally make both parties mad at the same time. And the next day in USA Today, columnists called me an equal opportunity offender, so I decided I like that. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is I'm going to talk about all the controversial stuff. I'm going to talk about tariffs. I'm going to talk about immigration. I'm going to talk about the Fed. I'm going to talk about all that stuff. And, in the course of doing that, I will assure you everything I talk about will be based on analysis and that sort of thing. I've been doing this, I'm not going to say almost 50 years. And I have, they tell me we produce over 1 billion numbers a year. And I don't count this stuff, but other people count it and tell me this stuff. But it's a lot, I know that. To the best of my knowledge, we've never produced a number that was a Republican, or a Democrat, or a liberal, or a conservative. And so again, consequently, we've made everybody mad one time or another. But anyway, I'm going to try to tell you what we think. So let's start out talking about tariffs, okay? In a port city here, right here, you certainly know the impact that tariffs can have. And there's a lot of misconceptions about tariffs out there right now. The first one is that these other countries are paying us money. That's not how it works. We pay the money. We're the ones who pay the money for the tariffs. Now, they pay a little bit, and I'll explain how that happens in a moment, but we pay the vast majority of it. We're the ones that actually cut the checks. And there's a lot of confusion about that. In fact, just this week, there were speeches made, fortunately they kind of backed off on it now, but there were speeches made this week telling this country, you're going to pay us this much more in tariffs. Well, no, we're going to pay that much more in tariffs. A good way to think about it is if you've ever traveled overseas, or to Mexico, anyway, you traveled out of the country, and you bought something. When you bought it, that government didn't send our government any money. That merchant didn't send our government any money. They didn't even know where you were from. Well, I don't know, in Texas you probably told them, but they don't have to know. But when you come back in the country and you fill out that little blue card, if you bought something that's subject to a tariff, you pay the tariff right then before you technically cross the threshold and come back to the United States. If you bring something into the port from somewhere else, you pay the tariff on it immediately before it leaves a bonded area. If you bring in a truck to Laredo, across Laredo, same thing. If you bring an airplane at DFW from some other country, same thing. Whoever receives the goods pays the tariffs. Now, here's how we end up paying, they end up paying a little bit of it. If I'm in another country, and I'm selling you something, and I'm your supplier, and I've been your supplier for a while, I like having your business, and all of a sudden the price goes up 25%, nothing I did, I might cut you a break on the price to try to keep your business. So there might be a little bit of that. There was a big study just came out this week from a German think tank who went into it in great depth, and they determined that's about 4% that other folks pay. We have done some analysis for what it's been historically over time with tariffs, when we have time to monitor them over decades and that sort of thing. It averages out to about 10 or 12%, something like that. So other countries do pay a little bit of it, just trying to help us out. But basically, we pay the tariffs. It's a tax on us. The other thing you hear is, well, yeah, we kind of know that, but we have to do it because these other countries are ripping us off. They're buying all this, we're buying all this stuff from them, they're not buying stuff from us. Well, we're not being ripped off. We just simply need more of their stuff than they need of our stuff. In some countries and others, it's the other way. That's just how it works. I was telling some folks before this thing, one of the things that wasn't mentioned in the introduction, I have a rather unusual commuting pattern. My office is in Waco and I live in Odessa. And when I told Jeff that, the judge, first thing he said was, why? And the reason is, I married this lovely lady 34 years ago, and when I married her, he said, if I make it to Valentine's, it'll be 34 years. And I think I'll make it. But anyway, but at the time I married her, she was the mayor of Odessa, and my office was in Waco. And when you marry the mayor, you move. That's the first law of economics. I mean, if you marry the mayor, you move. Okay, that's it. And then the folks I work with in Waco did not want to get up and move to Odessa, so I ended up with an office in Waco. And I will say, you know, I gave them a hard time at the time. 34 years later, 8 of those people are still working with me in Waco. So that's a great deal. That's worked out very well for us all. It means I travel a lot. But anyway, shortly after I moved to Waco, this lady started cutting my hair. Really nice lady. I managed to get in there about once a month. I made it last week. Had a lot more hair when she started than I do now. But she can cut my hair. I think it's around $40 for a haircut. And I get in there once a month, 10 times a year, something like that. So for years and years and years, I've paid her $400 or $500 every year. Not once, and she's a nice lady, but not once, not a single time in all those years has she ever hired me to do an economic impact study, or a speech, or a regulatory matter, or anything else. She has never hired me once. She doesn't need my services. So I've had a trade deficit with her all this time. And you know, and now if you suddenly put a tariff on that, 25% tariff on that $40, all of a sudden there's $10 of tariff on it. Well, several things could happen. She could look at me and she could say, Ray, man, my margins are too thin. I can't absorb that. You're going to pay me $50 for your haircuts now. Or she could say, you've been a good customer for 30 years. I'll absorb it. You just keep paying me $40. I'll eat it. Or we could agree on 45 or 42 or 47 or 48 or something else. I mean, we can make some other kind of deal. Whatever we did, though, what would not happen is I would not start cutting my hair. Okay? Because I'm not good at that. Okay? Well, and that's what countries do. I mean, we do the things we're good at, and we specialize and we trade. The fact that the math works on that and always makes us better off was discovered in 1815. It's never been contradicted, and it never will be because it's high school algebra. It's not something controversial or difficult. So basically, we all benefit from it, and you saw a great example of it in this video over here, talking about the supply chains and talking about what it takes and that sort of thing. It was a great example of it. I'll give you another one. If you just glance around this room for a minute, just take a look at the clothes, tables, the lights, the sound system, whatever, the food. Just kind of glance around the room for a minute. What you'll find is there is something in this room from more than 150 countries right now. And that's cheeky because this is a big, nice room. But you can do the same thing in your living room. I guarantee in your living room, there's 20 in your pocket with a cell phone, or if you're looking at it, there's 20 right there. I mean, nobody passed a law that said we had to do that. We don't even think about it. It just happens because we've developed this habit of people doing what they do in trading. And when you start ripping that apart, you start having consequences. I don't want to go on and on about this, but I do want to mention one other thing that's happened here. As has been mentioned several times now, I've been doing this for a long time. Okay? Almost 50 years. I know that's hard to believe given how young and virile and athletic I look up here and all that. I know. Why were you laughing? Let me explain something. Y'all must not go to a lot of speeches. Okay? The jokes are at the beginning. Okay? This stuff is serious. No, in the in-house, I have been doing this a long time. And I have been scared 2 days. During that 50 years, I've been scared 2 days. One of them was a day in 2008 during the mortgage crisis with some weird things happening in financial markets. If y'all ask me a question about that later, I'll talk about it, but it'd take too long just to interrupt right now. The other was April the 9th of last year. And here's what happened on April the 9th of last year. If you remember, April 2nd was Liberation Day. They announced all the tariffs, okay? Stock market tanks, okay? Bond market has a pretty good day. And that's normally what happens. When the stock market has a great day, the bond market has a not so good day, and vice versa. And there's reasons for that. If you're feeling good about stuff, and you think the world's going to be great in the future, you want to own a piece of it. So you go buy stocks. If you're nervous and worried about it, you want something safe, so you go buy bonds. And these big institutions that move, literally trillions of dollars around every day, kind of make it where one has a good day, one has a not so good day. And that's what you expect to happen. And we see it over and over again. If you remember the day after the last election, when President Trump was elected, the next day the stock market had a banner day. The bond market had a bad day. Why? Well, they wake up in the morning, whoever they voted for, what people start thinking is, President Trump won, I bet my taxes are going down. I like that. I bet there might be less regulation. I like that too. So I want to own some stock. So everybody goes and buys stock. And on the other side, they're thinking, yeah, but he's talking about these tariffs, and that's going to cause inflation, and we're kind of worried about that. And, that's going to cause my bond prices to go down, so I'm kind of nervous about that. So the bond market has a bad day. And that's typically what you find. Well, April 2nd, we announced the tariffs, stock market tanks, bond market has a good day. Next day, stock market tanks, bond market has a good day. We go on for a few days. Finally, on April the 9th, that morning, the stock market starts tanking, and people don't buy bonds. And that is about the scariest scenario we can have in the economy, because that means people have decided, right now, it's not U.S. debt that we have confidence in when we want something safe. We're kind of worried about what you guys are doing. Okay? That's something that we can't absorb and the world can't absorb, frankly. And they very quickly got together and put a 90-day moratorium on the tariffs and got past it. But that day really sent a signal. That's the first big chink in the armor that says, we kind of careful about this stuff. So all that to say, there's a lot at stake with the tariffs, and they've helped to slow things down in the economy. So I'll move from that to that other very uncontroversial topic of immigration. And I know it gets a lot of not much light. Now I'm going to try to take it from a little bit maybe broader perspective than you normally see it. I'm part of a generation, and I know some of you are too, I know Jimmy has a few others around here. I'm part of a generation called the baby boom. Those of us born between 1946 and 1964. And basically, we came back from World War II, we had won, and we were in great shape, and other countries weren't. We started having kids like crazy. And we kept having kids like crazy until birth control pills hit the market. So we had this 18-year period that just had all these babies, and we were kind of a wrecking ball through the economy. I mean, we overcrowded the schools when we were kids, we overcrowded the workforce later, now we're kind of messing with retirement systems. I mean, we're just kind of in this mass of humanity that's kind of rolled along for years. Okay? And then, what happens is when you have something like that, every generation, 20, 25 years later, you have kind of an echo boom type thing, but each one's a little smaller than the other because we've been having fewer and fewer kids. And we're kind of in the middle of one of those in 2007. And I'll throw a lot of numbers at you, I always do. You don't have to remember this one for a couple of minutes here. In 2007, there were 4.6 million babies born in this country. It's a fair number. We were on kind of an upswing there. Okay? In 2008, that number went down. And if you think back, that was the Great Recession, the mortgage crisis. So we always tend to have fewer kids during recession because people are nervous about it and that sort of thing. But it kept going down after that, 2008, 2009, 2010. It's gone down every year since 2007 except 2021. And the reason was we were all cooped up in 2020 with nothing better to do, so we had a few extra kids the next year. But then it started going right back down again. Last year we had less than 3.3 million babies. Now that's a big drop. 4.6 to 3.3. That's a big drop in the number of babies. Okay? Now, why that is somewhat important is those kids were born in 2007. They're all going to turn 19 this year. Okay? So this is when they kind of start to enter the workforce. And so every year, for a long time now, but it keeps happening year after year after year, every year, we're going to see fewer and fewer people coming into the workforce. Okay? Now, the youngest of the baby boomers are now in their early 60s. So they're going to be leaving the workforce in very big numbers for the next several years. And we're already short of workers. And there's probably none of you that own a business out here that had to struggle the last 2 or 3 years trying to find workers. I know I have. So basically we have fewer people coming in, more people going out. We already don't have enough. Anybody have an idea where we might fill a gap? Are there any other people anywhere we might think about bringing in to help us a little bit? Yeah, that's what immigration is. And we really relied on it for a long, long time to fill the gap. Now, here's the kicker, okay? Since December of last year, so 1 year, we don't have the final data yet because we shut down, messed up everything, but there's at least 1.5 million fewer people working in this country that were born somewhere else than there were a year ago today. So, if you think about that, not enough coming in, too many going out, and the group we used to fill in the gap is getting smaller. So you put all that together, you got a problem. And basically it says, we need immigration reform. What we have is a mess, there's no question. We need border security, we need all those things. But we need a realistic way for people to come into this country and work. There's construction projects in this area right now that are delayed because you can't get workers. Okay? And everybody wants to focus on the undocumented folks. And I understand that, they get a lot of attention. But that's not the whole story. It's a big part of the story, and it's an important part of the story. Right here in Texas today, roughly 14 million people went to work, and roughly 1.2 million of them were undocumented immigrants. About 1 out of every 9, about 1 out of every 11, so about 9%. That's a lot. Why did we say we didn't have those folks at all? But that's only part of the story, because it's not like everybody would be hit equally. It's half our agricultural workforce. It's 40% of our construction workforce. It's 30% of our hospitality workforce. So if you want to grow anything, build anything, or go anywhere, you're not going to have people do it. And it's really that simple. So we need a system that allows these folks to come here and work in a way doesn't provide risk to the employer and doesn't make them suffocate in a back of a truck, over here, or something like that. We need a good system where people can come over, work, and be able to be a part of our workforce, as we've had for years. Because basically what's happened is markets solve problems. The markets looked around for years and said we need more workers. And they said, well, here's some, let's go get them. And then we make it be inefficient by not having a good system to allow it to work. But that's just part of the story. It's what everybody wants to talk about it, and I understand that. But I would ask you have some great health facilities around here. Just go walk down just look around for a couple of minutes. Okay? What you're going to find is roughly 25% of our doctors are immigrants. Roughly 25% of all our other healthcare professionals are immigrants. Because we're not making enough people. Go to one of those fancy-dancy, high-tech places in Austin, and depending on what they're making, somewhere between 49 and 56% of the PhD engineers that are in there will be immigrants. Because that's the only place you can get them. So basically, policies that discourage people from coming in are going to be counterproductive for the economy and cause dislocations. So again, what we need is a reasonable reform system. People have tried in both parties for years. It's a hard thing to do. There are some people talking about it in Washington right now, but we really need to get to a system that allows people to work and allows us to have the workforce we need. Now, some folks say to me, well, Ray, we don't have to worry about that. AI is going to solve that problem. We're not going to need all these workers anymore. AI will take care of it. It's a real simple answer to that. No, it won't. Okay? It's going to change things a lot, and I'll spend just a minute on that. But basically, AI, it's a big deal. It's changing things. It will displace a number of jobs over the next few years, but only for a short period of time. And over time, it will create the need for more jobs. And the reason I feel good saying that is, there has never been a major innovation in the history of the world where that wasn't the case. Just in my career, when I first started, people talked about what computers were really going to get rid of all the jobs. Well, what happened? We all ended up working with computers. And, we went later robotics. We're going to replace half the jobs in the country, robotics. Well, we got a lot of robotics. We got more people working than ever. Then after that, it was the internet. We're going to cut out all the middlemen. We're going to do all this. We're not going to need all these people. There's going to be a massive number of people not working. Well, today we got the internet going full steam. We got more people working and more technology than any point in history. And people say, yeah, but AI is really big. It is big. I'm not sure it's bigger than a computer. That was a major deal, but it's big. I mean, it's big. But I'm going to give you one even bigger. We're going to go back 5,500 years to a little thing called a wheel. Okay? In Macedonia, about 5,500 years ago, they figured it out. the anthropologists, archaeologists can tell there were about 10 million people on Earth at that time, and it displaced about 75% of what they did. Okay? But think how much of everything we do today wouldn't exist if it wasn't for that technology and that reduction of friction and the movement of things that the wheel does. It totally changed the world. So, we never had an invention that did that didn't create more things than it destroyed. So yeah, it's gonna mess some stuff up in the short term, there's no question. But over a period of even 7-18 years, you're gonna find out more people are going to be working as a result of it than are going to be displaced. The process economists have called for years since the 30s creative destruction. You create something, you destroy some other things along the way, but you end up net creating more than you destroy. So that's the process that we go through. So all that to say, that's another one. And then very quickly, I want to throw in something about the independence of the Federal Reserve. We're hearing a lot about that one right now. And I will tell you, when I was a little bitty baby economist, I wrote my dissertation down at Rice. My dissertation was a model, back then they were kind of new things, a model of the monetary system in the world that the Federal Reserve and 65 other central banks still use today to monitor policy. So I've been in this for my entire career. And as a result of that, this will tell you something about my social life. Okay? One of the things I had to do when I was doing my dissertation to see if the model would predict what happened in the past, I had to go back and read 25 years of minutes of the Federal Reserve. So I'd read all the minutes back to the early 50s, okay? And I read them every time they come out now. So I've read 70 some odd years of minutes of the Federal Reserve. Now what does that say about my social life? But anyway, so I mean, all that to say, you're immersed in it. And it's absolutely essential that we have a monetary authority that can make independent decisions. They're not going to get it right every time, but there's plenty of times they've gotten it right. Some of you will remember in the 80s we had 13, 14% inflation. We got rid of that because the Federal Reserve imposed the discipline to get rid of it. It caused some short-term economic harm, which means politically it would have never happened. So it would still be stuck with it, but they were able to do it. There's plenty of other times. The day after the stock market opened after 9/11, the Fed put in the liquidity that allowed things to get started back up again. You wouldn't have been able to do that. In 2008, they literally saved the entire global economy, which the other day that scared me in the last 50 years. And during COVID, they had basically they put a huge amount of liquidity in the economy. If they hadn't done it, people would have starved to death. I mean, it was we shut down everything. It would have been a horrible humanitarian crisis. Because they did it, we had all this inflation. Well, every politician's running against that inflation now, so they would have never done it. So basically, the world was faced with a terrible choice. Let's put in a bunch of money and have some inflation. Or a catastrophic choice. Let's don't put in a bunch of money and let's let a whole bunch of people starve. Okay. The Fed, because they were independent, they could pick the terrible one instead of the catastrophic. Okay. Politicians would not have reacted fast enough and strong enough to do that. So there's a big reason why we need independent monetary authority. And I will tell you, I've worked in some capacity in every administration since Ford. I mean, I was a little baby during Ford. I didn't do much, but I did a little bit in every administration since Ford. So I go back a ways. I have never seen a president who did not want interest rates to be lower a few months before the elections. I mean, of course they do. I mean, everybody wants a juicy economy a little bit before elections. You guys, when you'd love it if a big, huge investment came in, 10 days before the election. That'd be great. People like to see that stuff. So you need somebody who can step away from that and call the balls and strikes. Just, do we need it? Do we not need it? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And so that's really important. Combining all those things together, you can throw in the recent ones, Greenland, all that stuff you want to, Venezuela, you can throw that in too if you want to. But all of this is causing what is probably the single most difficult word in the economy, and that's uncertainty. You mentioned in the introduction there, you mentioned I've been nominated for the Economics Nobel Prize. The difference in being nominated and winning is about $1 million. So if I ever win it, I'll know it. Anyway, we're kind of proud of that thing because there's one in medicine, there's one in physics, and all that kind of stuff. But there's not like a Nobel Prize in sociology or psychology or political science. We're the only ones that have mucked our stuff up with enough math that they give us a Nobel Prize too. And so we're kind of proud of that. And a few years ago, they gave it to some psychologists. And that really made us mad. They gave our prize to psychologists. In reality, one of them is a dear friend of mine who died recently. in his 90s, but they really did some cool stuff. They kind of explained to us that maybe we're not as rational as we think we are. Sometimes we systematically do stupid things and that sort of thing. And one of the things they taught us over the years in terms of how we build our models and that sort of thing is, and it applies to economics, but it also applies to any other part of your life, your health, your family, anything else. When you face uncertainty, the most natural thing to do is nothing. That's the most natural thing you do when you face uncertainty. You kind of take a step back, take a deep breath, and hope you feel better about it later. Well, in an economy, what that means is you don't build that new plant. You don't hire those new people. You don't build that new building. You don't bring out that new product. You don't buy that car. You don't buy that house, whatever the case may be. Economies are based on people looking at the situation, doing something, and uncertainty causes us to do nothing. And so as a result of that, you see an economic slowdown, and we have definitely seen that lately. We have definitely seen an economic slowdown. And I will tell you, we're not out of it yet. I think we've got another 6 months or so. I think we've come out of it, and I think we do very well. And I think this area is going to do especially well. I will get to that, I promise. We are going through this unmistakable slowdown. The United States last year created on average, about 49,000 jobs a month. The year before, we created 160,000 a month. And that was enough to be a president, because it wasn't high enough. We did 160 most years for the last 10, 15 years. Putting aside COVID, we've done about 200,000 jobs a month on average. 49,000. That's a big slowdown along the way. And we, again, we think you'll see that continue for a while, but I do think as we approach the midterms, I think you'll see some of the tariffs, we're all seeing some of them coming down some of the other things starting to get a little more certainty involved in them. I think you'll see us start to take off again. It'll be a little bit slow. We're forecasting the U.S. will grow about 2.4% GDP over the next 5 or 6 years, which is very much in line with our long-term trend, but it's backloaded. It's not happening this year. It's not happening next year. It starts happening like the year after that. So we've got a little bit to work through here. I want to briefly talk about Texas, then we'll talk some about South Texas, and then Southeast Texas, then we'll take some questions. But Texas is also slowing down right now. There's no mistake. We're slowing down. And we don't always do that. I mean, there's been a lot of times the U.S. economy started to slow down or get a little sluggish or even have a recession. And we're here in Texas, we said, we think we'll set this one out. You guys go ahead and do what you're going to do. We're going to keep growing. But we didn't get to do it this time. Because would anybody like to hazard a guess which state in this country is the most vulnerable to tariffs? Not a hard question, I promise. Obviously, Texas. 1/6 of all the commerce in this country, international commerce, is through Texas. And so obviously, if you start messing with international commerce, you're messing with Texas. You guys live in a port city, in a port region. You know that very, very well. And the other one, immigration. Which state do you think is the most dependent on immigrant labor? Texas. 2 reasons. Number one, we've grown a lot faster than everybody else, so we need more workers. Okay. 2, we have a 700-mile border with a country that's got a bunch of workers. And we made full use of those workers over time. And so basically, this is one where we don't get to sit it out. We're part of it too. And Texas has been gaining 250,000, 300,000 jobs a year for a long time. Well, when we started out this year just fine, we gained about 25,000 in January. We gained about 30,000 in February. We gained about 25,000 in March. We gained about 30,000 in April. We gained about 20,000 in May. So we're trucking along. We're doing okay. From May until now, net, the state has lost 10,000 jobs. Okay. So we normally gain 20,000, 25,000 or more every month. That's kind of an average, sometimes more, sometimes less. That's kind of a long-term average. For the last 7 months, net, we've gone up some months, down some months, but net we have lost 10,000 jobs. So we're definitely seeing the effects of all these policies here in Texas. We can't avoid it, and we're going to continue to see it for quite some time now. Now going forward, I think our long-term growth rate will be somewhere around 3.5% or so in output, around 1.7% or so in jobs. That's, again, very much in line with what you expect us to do, but it's going to be backloaded. I mean, this stuff is not going to go away immediately. It's going to take a little while for us to work through it. But if you look at why we're going to grow in the future, all you have to do is look at the sectors that are driving growth right now and see where Texas fits in those. And that will also kind of be, I'll talk a little bit about where Southeast Texas fits in some of those as well. One area that's growing a lot right now is financial services. You hear a lot about it because they put a stock exchange, a Texas stock exchange in Dallas this year. And the New York Stock Exchange moves something down here, NASDAQ moves something down here. So you hear a lot about it because of the stuff going on in Dallas with investment banking right now. But that's only a small part of the story. Over the past 20 years, the country has seen 11% growth in overall financial service employment. New York, which is the money center of the country, has seen 16%. Texas has seen 110%. Okay. There are now more people working in finance in Texas than there are in New York. They still have more investment banking, and they're still the money center for all that stuff, and they will be for a while. But overall financial sector, we've seen more growth in Texas than we've seen in the rest of the country. We now have the largest base of employment in that sector of anybody in the country. So that's a big shift, and something that's continuing. Another one that's growing a lot, and I should mention, you have some good, strong financial institutions down here that are making local community investments, doing a lot of things. You're a part of that. Another one that you also have some activity in, although not as much as some of the others, but some activity, is life sciences. That is probably the fastest growing in the world right now. Health and life sciences are the fastest growing things we have. Part of it is, after COVID, we kind of figured out we need to make some of this stuff here. That there's good reasons why we need to make stuff here. We also need to really amp up our research and do things. And Texas for years has funded a huge cancer research institute. We all just voted to fund a brain research institute, dementia research institute in the state just as well. There are multi-billion-dollar investments in the health system all over the state. And the reason so much demand is, number one, I say COVID kind of gave us a wake-up call. But beyond that, as a society, we are getting older. The baby boomers are growing into old age. Even though some drugs have reversed some of their slavery, overall, as a society, we are getting fatter. And when you get older and when you get fatter, you have more health care needs. And so there's a huge demand for that. We have all kinds of other issues we have to work on in terms of affordability and that sort of thing. But the underlying growth and the medical research, the bioscience growth is huge. In Texas, for a long time, wasn't a big player in that, but for the last few years, we've outgrown the country by about 300%. We've grown 3 times as fast as the country, and as much as 10 times as fast as Massachusetts and California and some of the areas that traditionally have been kind of the leaders in that industry. So that's another one. Advanced manufacturing, growing a lot, growing like you're all over that down here. You got it all over the place. Energy, and by that I mean diversified energy, not just oil and gas, which is what we think about. Oil and I want to stop a minute there because we're in Southeast Texas, and obviously you have the major investments that Dallas and Marianne were talking about taking place in LNG right now, which are so important. The ports here, the dominant part of the export activity here relates to petrochemicals and petroleum and LNG and other related sectors. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on that right now. This area is beginning to develop a pretty substantial presence in things like carbon capture, and beginning to kick the tires on things like ammonia and hydrogen and nitrogen, some of those alternative energy sources, all of which are very, very important to our future. But a lot of people are saying these days, if you go out and read stuff, a lot of people will tell you, well, we're trying to get rid of fossil fuels. We don't want fossil fuels anymore. The bottom line is, you can't. It's really that simple. Now we're in a little bit of excess spot right now. Prices are low. They're not drilling as much and that type of thing. But that's temporary. Because if you look at the long-term situation in the world, if I would have been here 3 years ago, what I would have told you was, all the advanced, I mean, I've been here 3 years ago, I'm not sure. But what I would have told you was, all the advanced economies are pretty stable. They're not having much demand for energy. But these emerging countries are going crazy with energy demand. And what I'll tell you today is, those emerging countries are going crazy with energy demand. But since we figured out AI and data centers and all that, we're going crazy with energy demand too. All the advanced economies are starting to demand more energy as well. So we now have a situation where the world's energy needs are growing very, very rapidly. And we've done some analysis on this, but I'm going to give you the Department of Energy's numbers. And they haven't put out any in the last year or so. These are the Biden administration Department of Energy numbers, okay? And I don't say that for political things, but just if anybody's going to try to cook the numbers against fossil fuels, you're probably more likely to see it in the Biden administration than you would in the current administration. These are their numbers, okay? Mine are higher, but we'll take theirs this time. If you assume their baseline case, renewables do a great thing, man. They triple. They're great. And you assume that nuclear makes a comeback. We get nuclear going again, like we should. And we get hydrogen going, and we get nitrogen going, we get ammonia going, and we get all those things. We improve battery technology. We do all the things. Okay? Their baseline forecast is if we do all that, in 2050, we're going to need 22% more oil and 27% more natural gas than we need today in the world. Okay. And they do all kinds of scenarios, different oil prices, different zero carbon prices, all that kind of stuff. And then the numbers vary, but in every one of them, in 2050, you need more oil, more natural gas than you need today. Okay. And so all that says, those industries are going to be with us. They're going to be growth industries for the future. You guys are making just the types of investments that allow that to happen in a big way. LNG is going to be critically important because we've got a whole bunch of the world that doesn't have natural gas. And geopolitically, it's very important. There is absolutely the only reason people talk about oil, we can replace the oil without too much difficulty. The only thing that gives, the only reason you know Vladimir Putin's name is because of natural gas. He controls natural gas supplies for a big chunk of Europe, and they've been trying to wing themselves, but they really haven't. There's particularly the black market. Because the pipeline system, he controls a big chunk of natural gas in Europe. If we replace that, and I told Congress this 15 years ago, if we replace that with LNG here, you'd be just like to know his name as you would the president of Estonia. I mean, there'd be no reason you'd know his name. Because, you take that away, Russia's economy is a lot smaller than Texas. It's no great shakes, except for that one thing. And so, there's huge geopolitical reasons. So all that to say, the industry's going to go through ups and downs, it always has, but on a sustained basis, it's going to be a huge growth industry in all aspects of it, and you guys are obviously well situated for all of that. And so that's another one where I think you're going to see a lot of opportunity going forward. Obviously, the data centers, AI, that sort of thing. Entergy's making some great investments around here, making sure you have adequate power to support everything that's happening in the area. You're beginning to see some pretty substantial locations and activity and interest with regard to not only AI data centers, that sort of thing, but the supply chain of stuff that makes those things work. And all of that is very important. It's very important for Texas. It's very important for this area. So basically, you're doing okay in all the major growth areas, and you're doing great in some of the really big ones. And so I think that bodes very well for the area. Like I say, I have been coming down here a long time. And when I first started, I tell you, the 80s were tough in this area. Some of you will remember that, but the 80s were tough in this area. There's no question about it. When we saw dramatic drops in fuel costs and that sort of thing. Back when I look over my forecast for the last 10 or 15 years and what it looked like it's very interesting. For most of the last 20 years or so, since you kind of got back on your feet, it's jumped around some, it's jumped around a pretty flat trend until COVID. And then like every other place on the planet, took a big dip in COVID. Since then, this place has been coming back like gangbusters. It blew past where you were before COVID, and the line's still going up. Okay. And I mentioned Texas has lost 10,000 jobs since May. This area has gained 2,000 jobs since May. Okay. Now, that's not a huge number, but when you put it in perspective, the entire state of Texas, netting out everybody, pluses, minuses, and everything, manages to lose 10,000. You're on the plus side of that by 2,000. That really makes a statement about what's happening here right now, about how you're setting the stage for the future, all those things. And when you look at all these emerging industries, the LNGs, you guys are just starting to go online. Dallas and his group's going to go online with some next year. That stuff's it takes a long time, but it's starting to happen. And there's a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. I thought the video was very good in capturing all the things you're doing right to be a logistics hub for a lot of this activity that's going on here. And so the investments are being made across the board, transportation, energy, everything else, that will allow you to do that. So at this point in time, our forecast for growth in this area is that your GDP growth will basically be just a hair above the state of Texas, and employment growth a little bit lower, primarily because your population growth is a little bit lower. At this point, your population growth is just not as fast as it is in some other parts of the state. But you also, your economy is built on high productivity industries that don't need as much labor as some of the others. You know, you can run an LNG plant, you can run a petrochemical plant, you can run a refinery, you can run those things without as many people, but they generate a huge amount of output for the area. And so your demographics fit your needs pretty well here on the whole. So that's not to say there's not challenges. There are challenges. Water. You guys have a competitive advantage in water right now. Around here, it's going to pay a lot of dividends, but the state of Texas has a water problem, and it's a water problem we're going to have for quite some time. We all as voters just voted to approve $1 billion a year for the next 20 years going to a water fund for Texas. $20 billion. The estimated cost to fix water in Texas right now is $152 billion. For those of you from College Station, $152 billion 20. Okay. I'm sorry, I apologize. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. But sometimes it just comes out, you know. But even though the former chancellor is one of my dearest friends, and the two most recent chairs of the Board of Regents are among my best friends. But I just can't help myself sometimes. But anyway, so but no, we have, but it should be the public sector. I mean, the private sector should do a lot of this. Innovation, creativity. And there's a lot going on now in terms of, you know, there's some desal projects that are starting to make sense now that didn't make sense 25 years ago. There's and there's not only the technology to take salt out of coastal water, you can also take out of brackish groundwater as well. So that's starting to happen. So there's things like that. There's these micro nuclear plants. You can build a nuclear plant on a couple acres, 2 or 3 acres. It can run a factory. It can run a big facility. It can run an oil field, and then perpetually use the heat to perpetually recycle the water. And there's that going on. Agriculture. We're seeing a lot of technological progress there, and that's the real kicker right there. We do a lot of work with the Coca-Cola Foundation on water. Very interesting. It probably doesn't shock you. Coca-Cola is the largest user of water in the world. That probably doesn't shock you. Although they use more of it to clean things than they do to actually for the drinks, but regardless. For the last 5 years, they have put back more than they've used. And for the last 2 or 3 years, Pepsi has too. I mean, they've really given on a kick on this. But there's a huge piece of it in agriculture. This shocks a lot of people, but agriculture is about 1% of our GDP. It's a very important 1%, but it's 1%. It uses 72% of the non-reclaimable water. If you get that number from 72 to 60, you don't have a water problem. And so technologies that make agricultural water use more efficient can pay huge benefits. Lots going on with that, but we have a water problem. And I tell people, when they ask me what's going to happen, we're going to solve it, and we're going to pay more for water. It's going to be a market-based solution by and large. Energy, we've got to have enough energy. I know you guys are in the energy area, but the ERCOT piece of Texas, the all-time high was not this summer, it was the summer of 25, but the summer of 24. It was really, really hot in August. Used 84 gigawatts of power at one time, one peak. That's the most it's ever used. It had electricity for over a century. That's the most ever used, 84. Their baseline forecast for 2030, and this is 2026, so we're not talking about way out in the future, is 150. If you take every single plant or every single AI facility that has applied to get hooked up, it's 240. So we got to build a lot of power infrastructure. Again, you guys here are making some great investments to make sure this area has what you need. It's supporting that AI, supporting the ports, doing all that. There's a lot of really good stuff going on right there. And then, another problem we have to solve, and this is the biggest one. This is the biggest one. We have to educate our kids. That is the single biggest challenge Texas faces going forward. We have a young population in Texas and a growing population. That's the single biggest economic advantage we have, is that young population, because workers are going to be in short supply for a long time because of all the things I just told you a few minutes ago about demographics. We're going to have bodies. The census tells us 82% of people who grow up in Texas end up in Texas. So they're going to be here. The question is, will they be good workers, or will they be people who are straining the social service system? And that's going to be a function of how well we educate them. And it's not easy. We have, right now in our student body in Texas, is about 54% Hispanic. And that's great. I mean, that's why we have that. Hispanics are younger on the average in the state and have larger families. That's why we have all these young people. That's a great thing. But we did some work not long ago looking at the household wealth of all the people who have kids in school in Texas, and then carved it up in various ways. The households that have that 55% of the students have less than 6% of the wealth, which means tutoring, summer programs, software, broadband, computers, even not having to work to help support the family is tough. I mean, 20% of the kids come into school, over 20%, with a language, struggling with language. The Center for Education Statistics usually did a big study, kind of a deep dive, and they only have enough data to do 41 states. But what they found was Texas had the most difficult student body to educate. We ranked 34th out of 41 in the resources we commit to. And and you see other indicators. CNBC does this ranking of the states every year on a whole bunch of stuff. Texas is always, in the last several years, first or second in the workforce, below 30 in education. You don't get to keep those indefinitely. If you don't invest in kids, you don't have it. So I say this quite often. Excuse me. If I'm just getting over a cold, I'm not contagious, I promise. I'm just getting over a cold. But anyway, I'll say this to you. If we educate the kids, there's absolutely nothing of all this other stuff I've mentioned is going to stop Texas from growing. If we don't educate the kids, despite all the other great resources and advantages we have, we're not going to be able to grow. It's literally that simple. It's that important. So we have some challenges. You have great opportunities. And like I say, for a long time, Southeast Texas did like this. Since COVID, Southeast Texas has done like this. And there's every indication that's going to continue to happen. So thank you all very much. I'll take some questions. Yes, sir.
When you were talking about tariffs, and that we have to pay those tariffs, and that is true. However, that's not, in my opinion, the reason for tariffs. The reason for tariffs is to blunt trade. And other countries have been raising their tariffs on the United States forever, so that we can't sell in their countries. You can go to some countries, and you will not see an American-made car because they can't compete because of tariffs. That's the main reason for tariffs. Not collecting taxes, it's blunting trade. And don't you think it's time we fought back?
Good question. I'll repeat it because you probably couldn't hear over here. He said basically, from his perspective, the major reason that we have, if I misstated it correctly, but basically the major reason we have tariffs is to blunt trade, to keep other countries from basically putting on tariffs to keep our goods out, retaliating, that sort of thing. And we should fight back. The bottom line is, first of all, there are some countries that have high tariffs in the United States. There's no question about that. There are some. On the whole, we have negotiated over the last 20 years, 25 years or so, and I've been involved in about 10 of the negotiations, essentially free trade deals with most of the major parts of the world. We have pretty close to free trade, but prior to the recent imposition of tariffs, with most parts of the world, there are exceptions, particularly in Asia, there's a lot of exceptions there. But on the whole, what I would like to see is, and I promise you this, if we could get rid of all of them, and nobody had any tariffs, we would be the winners. Because we make the most high-tech stuff, the stuff that's the highest value-added stuff in the world is what we make. Other people make the stuff that's a lower technology component, less value-added, that sort of thing. In fact, years and years ago, there's one thing that always happens when there's a recession, and you can tell we haven't had a recession yet, because when there's a recession, you can set your watch. The president's going to have an economic summit. Okay? Over the course of my career, I think there's been 5 recessions because I've spoken at 5 presidential economic summits. So, but years ago when President Bush had his, W. Bush, he asked me to talk about what was the best thing the United States had ever done in terms of supporting long-term economic growth, what was the worst thing. And the best thing we've ever done is the next big thing. That's what we do. We innovate, we create, we do the next big thing. And then when it becomes a commodity, somebody else does it. And that's how we've built our economy. The worst thing we've done is not retrain workers when their skills have become obsolete. By the way, in terms of, if you look at all the fundamental patents right now in AI, in nanotechnology, in genomics, you name it, all these new fancy-dancy things, we have all the fundamental patents. We have over 95% of the fundamental. We're the ones that create all the new cool stuff. We always have been. By the way, there's one kind of funny story. It's not a joke, it's a true story about nanotech. If we have time at the end, I'll tell it. So it's not, it's nanotech, it's not that funny, but it's a little bit funny. You remind me of what about worse than nanotech. But no, there are clearly situations where countries put on tariffs to keep us out. There are clearly situations like that. But on the whole thing is counterproductive. Again, the math that says we shouldn't do any of that is over 200 years old and never been contradicted. What else? Anything else? Do I have time to come in and I'll take? Oh, I'm coming. Okay, good.
Oh, you said if we asked you at the end, you'd tell us a little bit more about the day that scared you in '08.
Okay, the day that scared me in 2008, absolutely, yeah. Normally, you have the overnight rate that the Federal Reserve charges that the Federal Reserve charges to lend banks money. Okay, and not much money gets traded on that really. The big market is banks lending money to other banks overnight. Okay, the government loan is like risk-free, so it's like the lowest rate you're going to get. It's the risk-free rate. Okay, normally the rate that banks lend money to other banks overnight is just about that much higher because it's a pretty low-risk loan. One bank's lending money to another bank secured by government bonds for one day, so it's not like a high-risk note. Okay, so it's normally just a fraction higher, so they make a little bit of money. Okay, and in essence, this is a market where little banks lend money to big banks because big banks have all these algorithms. They're always pushing right up to the edge of the reserves they need, and the smaller banks stay fairly liquid. So they make a little money by taking their extra money and lending to the big banks overnight. This happens day after day after day, and forever and ever, that spread was like 2 basis points, 0.02%. Okay. It went up one day by a factor of 55, which basically said the little banks were saying to the big banks, if you guys are going to keep doing this crazy mortgage stuff, we don't want any part of it. And it was very close to shutting down the entire system, and it took the Federal Reserve going in with a bunch of cash and making the loans to keep it afloat. I mean, it was that dire, it was that close. Yeah. So that was what happened in 2008. That scared me, and then April 9th scared me. Anything else? Do we have time for the nano joke? Not a joke, it's a true story. But it's, okay. Nanotechnology was actually invented at Rice. And the guy the major guy that invented it was a guy named Rick Smiley, who unfortunately died of cancer much too young a few years ago. But Rick and I got to be friends. My last year in grad school was his first year as a young chemistry professor at Rice. And you wouldn't think economics and chemistry, but we sat in the faculty lounge together. They made all the geeks sit at the same table, so that's how we got to know each other. And then later, as that stuff started having economic development applications, he started going out with us and doing stuff. He thought that was cool, so we got to be good friends. And he always seemed like the nicest guy to me, but he must have had some issues because over the course of his life he had 4 wives, and when he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry in I think it was 96 or so. At that point, he was on his 3rd wife. Okay, and so obviously, he and his wife were going over to Sweden to get the prize, and they give him 10 tickets for all the events and stuff to bring people who wants to bring that sort of thing. So he gives his son 2 tickets and says, bring a friend and come go with me. Well, his son calls him back a couple of days later and said he loved to tell this story himself. He said, "Dad, I decided to bring Mom." So all of a sudden, he has 2 wives. Okay? And he's giving away all his tickets. Okay. Now, there's, I guess, a basic law of economics I wasn't aware of. You and your current wife can do whatever you want to. You and all 3 of your wives can do whatever you want to, but 2 out of 3 is not going to work. Okay? And they all had a piece of it in their divorce decree, so they knew he'd win it someday. It was kind of a foregone conclusion. So they all got a little piece of it. So he had to go ask the Nobel Committee for an extra ticket to bring his other ex-wife to Sweden. So he gets over there, and not the big ceremony with the medals on and all that stuff, but the night before they're having like this honorees dinner thing, and it turns out the guy that's the master of ceremonies was the guy that arranged Rick's extra ticket. So when he's introducing all these folks, and he says, I'm Nobel laureate in chemistry, Rick Smiley, and his wife, and his wife, and his wife, and he said, if we had known this guy could show up with 3 wives, we'd give him the Peace Prize.
recently in the market in precious metals, silver and gold. Did that catch you by surprise, or did you predict that? Or?
We don't go around predicting commodity prices because I'm sane, but, you know, I'm often said when you do it, there's only three kinds of forecasters. There's the new, the humble, and the former in that world. But anyway, no, it didn't surprise, the precious metals don't surprise me because again, it's somewhat like I talked about on April 9th. When people lack confidence, they move to precious metals. I always have. There's no real indicative reason why they do it, but somehow they decide gold is a good thing to have, you know. And so that's been, you know, so that hasn't, I mean, it's gotten up over $4,500 a couple of times, but that hadn't, you know, it hadn't surprised me that it's happened. It's a little bit concerning that it's happened. As far as AI is concerned, you know, honestly, and I will start with, I am not a financial advisor. Do not invest on anything Ray says, please. But I will say, I think that the AI stocks are a little bit of a sugar high right now. And some of them are my clients. I mean, I'll say that. But the difference in this and like the .com thing, where the bubble burst and we had all those losses, it took the NASDAQ 5 years to recover after that. There was no there with the .com. You know, it was all kind of make believe. With AI, there's really stuff there. Those algorithms really are doing wonderful things, are going to change the world, but I think people may have kind of overvalued them right now in the marketplace, but there's still something there and it's still going to have a big, huge long-term success. But I think there is a little bit of a sugar high going on right now in the markets with regard to AI. The precious metals, the more uncertainty we have, the more that's going to happen. You know, and we seem to be manufactured pretty well right now.
Thank you, Doctor.
Like it.
Dr. Perryman, always a